Mirage of Victory, written by Martin Hicks, narrated by John Delino Zeigler, Jr. Prologue. Even a casual observer could quickly have recognized that the soldier was on a familiar and well-established route as he made his way along the riverbank. The path he was following could be easily seen as such, marked as it was by trampled down and withered grass that stretched along, like a yellow-brown ribbon, parallel with the line of the Rappahannock River, except in those places where it briefly altered course to skirt around an occasional clump of thicker scrub or trees which, in places, grew near to the water's edge. In his manner and bearing, the man exuded an air of casual familiarity as he continued on his way, making no attempt to conceal himself, and even aiming an occasional idle kick at one or two of the tussocks of long grass as he passed by. Daniel Ryan was a relatively tall man, with light brown hair, now trimmed sufficiently short, in deference to the arrival of the warmer months of the year, to rest easily behind his ears. He had a look of unshavenness about him, rather than being fully bearded, in an army where hair was predominantly worn long, and beards were the comparative norm. This was especially so on active campaigning, when regular shaving among the enlisted men, even among those who remained clean-shaven in camp, tended to become as rare an occurrence as regular washing. Ryan was clad in a worn tunic of the yellowish-brown shade that was commonly referred to as butternut, cut short in the fashion of cavalry jackets, so that it barely reached his waist. His pants were made of a coarser cloth and were a darker shade of brown in color. Both of these garments were the worse for wear, with each of them sporting a collection of mended holes and rents gained through the routine rigors of soldiering. That process of wear and tear had been greatly intensified by the fraught episode of campaigning, back at the start of the month, in the jagged forests of the Spotsylvania wilderness out to the west of the Rappahannock, and the judicious stitching and patching that had been attempted on each garment since then had offset, rather than remedied, the damage that both had suffered. The cuffs of the tunic and the bottom edges of the pants remained ragged, with both elbows of the former, together with one of the knees, the crotch, and the seat of the latter, being patched, and since this had been done with fabrics of different colors from the garments themselves, they tended to emphasize their threadbare and worn appearance in spite of the efforts at repair. On his head, Ryan wore a wide-brimmed, slouched hat, but it, too, showed signs of dilapidation, nursing tears in both crown and brim. Hard use as a pillow as well as a head protection had caused it to degenerate into an almost shapeless form, with its brim up in some places and down in others. It was, however, widely acknowledged that the summer campaigning season in Virginia was no time to be without a hat, even one as sorry in appearance as this one. The shoes he wore were also worn and scuffed, but, with their uppers topped by thick woolen socks, they were still in being. This was more than could be said for all too many of his less fortunate comrades in the Army of Northern Virginia, who soldiered with crude moccasins or sandals on their feet at best, or in bare feet at worst. Replacement clothing and shoes, however, had been a long-standing difficulty for the Army, going back to the early days of the war, and in terms of his shabby appearance, Ryan was in no way atypical of its soldiers. In contrast to his nondescript dress, however, the weapon that he carried was both modern and well-maintained, exhibiting brightly polished metal parts and a well-greased dark wood stock. It was a long-barreled Enfield .577 caliber rifled musket of British manufacture. Well balanced and accurate, it was by now a common and popular weapon in the Confederate Army, and was seemingly widely used by the Yankees also. In keeping with his generally casual air, however, rather than carry it in his hands, Ryan had slung it over his shoulder on its greased fabric strap. It was against regulations for pickets to do this, but it was common practice among the men on both sides of the river in spite of that. Ryan continued on the trodden path along the river in his leisurely way, taking his turn at the chore while others of his picket detail relaxed at the grand post back from the Rappahannock itself. There was nothing in his manner, however, to suggest that he patrolled the margin between two powerful and hostile armies.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?